Hey guys, it's Kaylor. Welcome to the YouTube channel. Today I have a code tutorial for you guys. We're going to be creating a multi-leveled drop-down menu only using HTML and CSS. So before we begin, this is more of an intermediate style CSS tutorial. So if you guys have any questions, leave them down in the comments below. I'll be trying my best to answer them. If you're excited for this video, make sure you leave a like. And with all that said, let's get started. So here I have my HTML file. Just have everything set up. I'm inside of the body tag. Up here, I'm linking to my main.css, which is this file right here. And then if you look at my folder structure, I have an images folder with an arrow icon, which is just this PNG file. It's a 16 by 16 arrow, or 96 by 96 pixel arrow here. So if you guys want to create one of those, you can. I'll probably have a link in the description so you can download this entire folder once we're done. So let's start adding our code. So inside of the body, I'm going to add a div tag with a class of nav. I'm going to be using mine for navigation. If you're using it for a mobile nav, call it whatever you want to call it to symbolize that. So inside of this, I'm going to start by creating an input of type checkbox, and I'm going to give it an ID of menu. Next, I'm going to create a label that's going to be pointing towards that ID of menu, so for menu. And inside of here, I'm going to give it a Unicode of and hashtag 9776 semicolon. So you'll see here we just added a hamburger menu. That's what that Unicode does. And so how this works is, I've mentioned this in past code tutorials if you've seen any of those. This is just pointing towards that checkbox. So if I click this button here, it activates the checkbox. So inside of that div, we also need to start with our elements that's going to be dropping down. So I'm going to create another div with a class of multi-level, and inside of here is going to go each one of our div tags for our drop downs. So I'm going to give this one a div class of item. So we're going to create multiple items, and inside of each one of these is going to be our first level of elements. So in item 1, I'm going to create another input of type checkbox with an ID of A. Close that, and then create a label for that for A. And this label is going to be my first element, which is services. So here you'll see I have my services on the screen with its corresponding checkbox next to it. Below that, we're going to create an unordered list. And each of these is going to be dropping down from this element. So I'm going to create an LI. I'm going to open and close an A tag. On the href, I'll just pound symbol that out. And this one's going to be called branding. So under services, we have branding. Then I'm going to also put web/app development. And below that one, we'll do internet marketing and SEO. And those are all the elements we're going to have under that dropdown. So this dropdown is just going to be one level, and it's pointing to each one of these individual pages. So I'm going to find my item div, and I'm going to open another one below that one with class of item. So this is our second item, and this one's going to have an input of type checkbox with an ID of B, since this is our second item. I'm going to close that tag, and we're going to have a label for it pointing towards that ID. And on this one, I'm just going to call it jobs. So our second drop down is going to list a series of jobs, so we're going to need an unordered list. Okay, so instead of following our same structure we did up here, where we have a checkbox and we have a label for that checkbox, and then we have our links inside of our unordered list, this time we're going to go ahead and create a sub item, which is going to be basically like our item here. It's going to have its own drop down menu. So it's a little complicated at first, but it's very simple once you get the hang of it. So we're just going to create a list item that's inside of this unordered list, and inside of that we're going to create a div tag, and I'm going to open that up. I'm going to give it a class of sub-item, so we know it's a sub item. And inside of here at the top we need to create an input just like we did before of type checkbox, and I'm going to give this one an ID of B-A. And so the reason I'm doing that is because this is the first sub element of the B item. You can do any kind of naming scheme you want. I just found it was simpler to do capital letters. And so we're going to need a label for this. So label for B-A. And I'm going to call this one UI/UX. So this is our UI/UX jobs. And it's going to have its own unordered list now. So inside of this list item, we're going to have another UL. And then here we're going to have list items. Each one of these is going to have an A tag since they are links to other pages. I'm going to pound symbol those out. And the first one is going to be for a UI/UX designer, so someone who does both jobs. Second one is going to be for a UI designer only. And the last one is going to be for a UX designer. So if we look over here on the right, services and jobs are on the same level. And these three links and UI/UX are actually on the second level, and then this is now the third level of our dropdown. Okay, so outside of this list item, so we're back in this unordered list now, let's create another element, so another list item. And this list item is going to need another div tag. So I'm going to open that one up. And this one's going to have a class of sub-item as well. And following the same structure as the last sub item, we're going to need an input of type checkbox. I'm going to give this one an ID of B-B. And then we're going to need a label for that, pointing towards that ID, so B-B. And this one's going to be development. So these are going to be development jobs now. So below our label, we need to create an unordered list so we can have the drop down for this one. And we'll just create LI. And we'll give each one of these an A tag and href, pound symbol these out. So these are going to be linking to the development pages. So we're going to have front end developer, and then let's just do back end developer. Okay, and so that sub item is now done. So outside of its div and list item, you can also add links that do not need to be their own drop down. So to do so, I'm just going to create a list item for example, create an A tag, href, pound symbol that out, and we'll call this one graphic design. And then the last one, we'll do another one of logo design. Let's actually make these graphic designer and logo designer. Makes a little bit more sense. So that's all I'm going to need under the jobs drop down. So I'm going to add one more drop down. I'm going to give this a class of item since we're now outside of this div that we were working in. And we're going to need an input so it can have a drop down. And let's give it a type of checkbox with an ID of C since it's our third drop down. And we'll give it a label for C. And let's call this one about us. We'll create another unordered list. And this will be containing all of our list items that link to pages. So href, pound symbol those out. And we're going to have our team. Let's duplicate that one. Then we'll have clients. Duplicate that. And then we'll have our work. Alright, so that is now all of our HTML that we need for our dropdown. You guys can make this your own. Add dropdowns where you need them. You get the point. You have an item. Inside of that item, you have a checkbox, and that checkbox represents the title of the next dropdown. And inside of that, you can have list items, or you can go another level deep and create a sub item, and it has its own checkbox, which has its own unordered list. And then you could go another level deep and just call that like sub-item, and it can have its own label and then another drop down, and you get the point. You can go as many drop downs as you want. I personally wouldn't suggest you going any further than this because then you're getting into user experience issues, and it's just good to keep it nice and simple. Alright, so before we begin our CSS coding, I did mention that we are going to have icons of arrows next to each one of our drop downs. We're going to be adding that at the end, but I am going to go ahead and code the .arrow class in this. So if you're wondering what .arrow is, you'll see in a bit. So don't worry and don't freak out that I forgot something. Alright, so let's start with our global styles. I'm first going to add just a comment, because I like to organize my CSS, especially if you're using one CSS for your entire website. It can get very long. So I'm just going to call this one global. And below here, let's just target the HTML and the body tags. And we're just going to set some general styles. So the width is 100%, margin of 0, padding of 0. And let's go ahead and set our font family to something like Helvetica, and then a sans serif if that's not available. And that's about it for the global. So let's create another section, and I'm just going to call this one Func, and this is where all of our functionality to our drop-down is going to go. So I just quickly split my screen horizontally, and I need to mention that I'm going to be using several CSS selectors. So if you're not familiar with them, I highly recommend you go to W3 Schools and look at the CSS selectors. I'll leave a link down in the description below so you can easily go read up on them. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to write one line that hides all the checkboxes and all of our links by default. So dot multi-level. Then I'm also going to target the dot item classes and their ULs. And we'll just do that for now, and we'll say display of none. So that just hid all of those, and that collapses them by default. And I'm also going to target all the checkboxes now. So all of these checkboxes on the screen are going to be targeted by saying .nav space input, and I'm going to do of type checkbox. And so now all of our checkboxes are hidden. So now we need to be able to open the menus when we select a checkbox. So to do that, we're going to say hashtag menu :checked, and then I'm going to use the tilde key to target the dot multi-level. Then I'm also going to say dot item space input of type checked. Use my tilde key again, target the UL of all of those, and we're going to say display of block. So all that did is when we click on one of these, it's going to expand its drop down. With just 2 lines of code, we can now collapse and expand all of these links. Pretty cool. So I'm going to go ahead and expand all of them just so we can see what we're going to be doing. And that's pretty much all you need for the functionality. So now I'm going to create another comment, and this one's going to be for the arrow. So let's go up to our HTML and actually add that arrow class in. So everywhere we need an arrow is right before each label. So for every drop-down title, we're going to add an arrow. And I'm going to do so by just saying image of source images arrow, and then just close that up. Let's also add a class on there called arrow, and I'm just going to copy this, and like I said, add it right before each label. So here's a label, we'll put it in front of that. So all of these arrows, it looks really weird, is in front of every drop down. So the only thing I'm going to add right now is just dot arrow and display of none, just so we can hide it. Later on, I'm going to style it once we style everything else, and we're also going to get the functionality going. So then let's open up another class, and I'm going to title this one of styles, and we're just going to start styling this now so it looks good. First things first, when we highlight over a label, we need to change our cursor. So cursor, I'm going to change that into a pointer. So when we highlight over the labels, it acts like a link. Very nice. Next, we need to style our labels. So a width of 100%, display of block, z-index of 3 so that it's on top of our arrows in a bit, so we can just click anywhere on the label and acts like a link. So z-index of 3, position of relative, that is also for the arrow later on. Then we'll style our .nav. So the nav, I want to have a width of 100%. I want a background color of white, And I want to set an overflow of X to hidden. So anything that overflows on the sides of the screen, I want it to be hidden so it doesn't like break our screen at all. And then a border to the bottom. Let's do 1 pixel solid. And I'm going to give it a color of CFD 8DC. So it's a lighter blue-gray color down there. Now we need to style our .nav icon. We don't actually have that, so I'm going to go back to my HTML, find my hamburger menu, and add an ID of nav-icon. So down here we'll say hashtag nav-icon. And we're going to set the font size on this to 28 pixels should do. The line height I'm going to set to 50 pixels. Let's set a padding to the left of 1 EM. And let's say color of white. And then a background color of F44336. Now let's style a lot of our elements at once. So I'm going to target the .nav UL, the .nav LI, and the label. Now if you're going to do different styling than me, this might mess up a little bit. So if you're not doing exactly what I'm doing, you might need to separate these 3 because it will apply these to the same elements a few times. But for my case, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't cause any problems. So just be aware of that if it causes issues for you. So line height of 50 pixels to match the nav icon. I'm going to set a margin of 0, padding of 0 to the top and the bottom, and then 2M to the sides. List style, let's take that away, so we need none. Text decoration of none. I'm going to set a color to this of 90A4AE. Set a font weight of 100 and a width of 100%. Next, let's style a .item UL. We have some padding issues. Padding of 0 to the top and bottom and 0.25 EM to the left and the right. That straightens everything out just a little bit better. And now we need to target the .nav LI A, so our A tags. And let's just copy everything we have up here. And we'll paste it in here. This is one of the items that I could not include up here because it acted a little weird. And I think everything should be the same. The padding I know needs to be bumped to 4 since it's another tier down. We don't need the width, so we'll take that one off. And so that's pretty much all of our styles for our dropdown. Let's just add our arrows now. So everything is functioning nicely and it all works. It just doesn't look the greatest. That's why we need to add our arrows. So let's see, UX. All right, so I'm going to take away the display of none. Let's set a width and a height to 12 pixels. I'm going to vertically align this to the middle. I'm going to float it to the left. And I'm going to put a z-index of 0 so it is actually behind each one of these labels. See, what we did was we made these labels 100% width so we can click anywhere in this section and it will actually drop that down. So now we need these to be positioned underneath that label but next to the word. So the z-index, make sure it's below it. So now let's adjust the margin to position it correctly. 17 pixels by 1 EM by 0 by 2 EM puts mine in the correct position, as you'll see there. And now when we click on these, we need this to animate. So to do so, by default my arrow is rotated down, so we're going to need to rotate it to the side a little bit. So I'm going to say .item input plus the dot arrow class, transform, rotate, -90 degrees, DEG, semicolon. So now by default they are rotated to the side, so it looks like it's collapsed. And we want this to animate transition over 0.1 seconds, so 0.1 s. So when it's returning back to this state, it will animate as well. So now let's animate it as we drop the menu down. So to do that, we're going to say dot item input, if it's checked, plus the dot arrow class. So when it's checked, the arrow class needs to transform, needs to rotate to 0 degrees over a transition of 0.1 seconds. And there we go. So we can collapse all of these now and see that our menu does work. Okay, so I did accidentally add one arrow next to our hamburger menu. I was trying to figure out why it was pushed over that far off camera. There we go. Okay, so make sure you don't add the arrow next to that label. Everyone but that label gets an arrow. And that is it. That is all you need to create your own multi-level drop-down menu, either for a mobile navigation or any part of your website. All the links that you will need are in the description, including the source code to this tutorial and to the CSS3 selectors, so you guys can read more about those. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, make sure you leave a like on this video. If you haven't subscribed yet, you should for more UI content. As always, I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you guys in the next one.